So, Ballerina from the world of John Wick was directed by Len Wiseman and stars Ana de Armas, Norman Reedus, Gabriel Byrne, Catalina Cedillo Moreno, as well as a few actors who have appeared in previous John Wick movies, including Angelica Houston, Lance Reddick, Ian McShane, and of course, Keanu Reeves. And this movie, it's about Ava Macaro. She was a part of the Roscaruma from John Wick 3, and she learned how to be an assassin and such. And she goes after an organization that took out her father and tries to get revenge. This was a movie that I was interested in, but was also kind of nervous in. Now, if you've seen my John Wick reviews, you would know that I am a huge fan of the John Wick franchise. I love all the movies, and I was very curious to see what this movie was going to be like because it was the first spin-off movie in a way. It's going to take place between the events of John Wick 3 and John Wick 4, and I was kind of curious to see what kind of world, how much more expansion can this world really get to, and I'm like, the trailers themselves looked okay, but I was also kind of nervous because the movie itself was delayed a full year, unfortunately. I don't know if it's because of rewrites or reshoots. Apparently, Chad Stahelski had to come back in and kind of redo a lot of these scenes and such. So I saw it, and honestly, there are times in this movie where the movie is actually really good. Particularly, the action sequences are really good, but there are times where I'm like, you could have done a little bit better there. But let's talk about some of the things I do like about this movie first. The acting, I think, for the most part, is pretty good. Ana de Armas carries this whole movie. I thought she was great. Not only is her character intriguing, but her action sequences are also very well done. I thought her character was very fascinating, and if there's any more of Eva Macaro, I kind of want to see her more. I actually do. I also think a lot of the fight scenes are very well done. In a John Wick movie, you're bound to get some great fight scenes. And there are some great scenes, including one in the nightclub, the third act completely, which involves a flamethrower at one point. That was really fun. The opening action sequence is pretty good. There are definitely a lot of great action sequences. I don't know if there's like as good as action sequences as there are in some, say, John Wick 2 or 3 or 4. I would say these are about on par with 1, but they want to be more than John Wick 1, I would say. And I would say it's mostly in the first act and the third act where the action sequences can be really good. And once again, the cinematography is absolutely stunning. Not only are the action sequences captured very well, but also how everything is just lit perfectly. It's like each scene is lit differently and it's so unique. And I do think that, these John Wick movies, they often have great cinematography and not just talking about showing off the action sequences. And I think this movie continues the tradition of that. And I do think that the John Wick lore is still there. You kind of learn a lot more about the Roscaruma. You do learn a lot about some of these other people who were kind of brought into these organizations and such, kind of like how John Wick was brought into it. And I would be curious to see what some of these other characters would be like, how they got involved with some of these situations, and how they kind of became involved with things like the Continental and such. But I kind of don't like some things about this movie, if I'm being honest. Now, as I mentioned, the John Wick movies usually have great action sequences, and there are great action sequences in this movie as well. But there are some action sequences in this movie that are a little bit too funny. Like, almost like they kind of come out of a comedy rather than they come out of a John Wick movie. Now, don't get me wrong, there are some really comedic fight scenes in John Wick movies, but they never relied on the comedy. Like, there's one scene where at one point they're kind of like fighting, where Ana de Armas is fighting someone, and I'm thinking at one point, this kind of reminds me of the Three Stooges. And lo and behold, they accidentally turn on the TV during the fight, and the Three Stooges are on. Okay. You're kind of losing me, movie. Like, don't get me wrong, it's funny when John Wick takes out a bad guy with a book, or bad guy with a pencil, or just everyday household objects. But they still kind of kept in tone with the rest of the movie. And I felt like this movie didn't quite do that, unfortunately. And I felt like they kind of focused less on making the comedic scenes funny. The action sequence is funny, and instead of just being fun. Like the flamethrower, I thought that was fun and worked, and definitely felt more like a John Wick movie than anything else. I felt like those sequences just didn't really work. It's mostly in the second act where I felt like the action sequences kind of became a little too cartoonish. Also, there are a couple plot lines in this movie that I won't spoil by any means, but I felt like they don't really matter too much in the overall movie, and I'm like, okay, where are you going to go with this? You're literally going nowhere. Okay, that's interesting. And also, there are some moments in a timeline where I'm like, wait, so if this is happening then, and how is this happening, and how is this supposed to be happening? Because apparently this takes place between the timeline of John Wick 3 and John Wick 4, and there are so many questions I had by the end. I'm like, wait a minute, how is this possible if this happened in the previous movie? Or, what's happening currently and such. And also, I feel like a lot of the side characters, they don't really matter. Now, first, well, even though Keanu Reeves, once again returning as John Wick, he's great in the movie. I forgot to mention him. He's definitely in the movie a lot more than I expected him to be, and when he's on screen, it's definitely awesome. But there are some side characters that I wish had a little bit more screen time. Like Gabriel Byrne is a very generic villain. Norman Reedus is in the movie for a few scenes. Catalina Sedano Moreno, again, very forgettable. And some of the other characters from the previous John Wick movies, like Ian McShane, Angelica Houston, Lance Reddick, and unfortunately his last role. I felt like a lot of the side characters just didn't matter in the overall movie, and I wish they kind of had a little bit more character, I would say. But then again, you've seen some of these other characters in these other movies, so it kind of evens out a bit, I guess. But then again, this is mostly just Ana de Armas's movie. If you're a fan of action sequences, if you're a fan of the John Wick movies, or if you want to see Ana de Armas kick ass, then you'll definitely enjoy this movie. I definitely say that this movie, while not as good as the John Wick movies, I will definitely say it's fun. But it's just not quite a work of art. You can definitely tell at times when it's like it was a Len Wiseman action sequence and when it was a Chad Stahelski action sequence. And that's all I'll say. So I will say Ballerina, it has a few fun moments here and there. There are great action sequences. Ana de Armas carries the movie. Keanu Reeves is also really good. The fight choreography is very well done for the most part. The cinematography is gorgeous. The lore is still interesting. The characters are still interesting, kind of. But I will say some characters needed a little bit more time. I would say that there are some issues in the timeline which don't really make a lot of sense. Some plot lines which I felt like didn't really matter too much, and also some of the action sequences, particularly in the second act, I felt like they kind of fell apart a little bit, and they were focusing more on trying to make you laugh rather than trying to make, I don't know. Something about the action sequences kind of threw me off in the second act, and that it was just a little bit too comedic for me. Whereas, like, yeah, it's fun. They focus on being funny instead of being fun at times. And I felt like it could have worked a little bit better if they stopped doing that. Ballerina has its moments, but I don't know if it's definitely not on the same level as the John Wick movies, unfortunately. I'll give Ballerina 2.5 out of 4 stars. Stream it. So, how would you rank the John Wick movies, including Ballerina? Comment down below, subscribe to the channel. This is Pat, and stay safe.